Our Linda Mashburn is our speaker this morning. And Linda, I did not know all of this about Linda. Some of you might, but Linda earned her undergraduate degree in philosophy and also a diploma in nursing. And she took those nursing skills abroad and was a missionary in India for a few years. Then she came back and got her graduate degree from Columbia and the Union Theological Seminary in New York. So she took that time to sort out her own beliefs. And she moved permanently to Appalachia and found her calling helping communities organize around access to healthcare. And then a little bit later, she met Bill, and they had a family of 3 children. And they moved to Abingdon 7 years ago to live at Elder Spirit, which they both helped found. I'm all gobbly this morning, sorry. And of course, then they discovered our UU church community. And Linda is speaking to us this morning about community. Yes, I saw a few different titles at one point, so I wasn't sure which one was correct, but community is our topic.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah. And your readings were very appropriate, starting our service today. Community may be one of the most difficult things to create, but also something that we all are called to attempt, to help form, to join, to enhance, to regularly celebrate. In the New Testament, Paul likens community to the parts of the body forming the whole. And I'm quoting, "For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, 'Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if an ear should say, 'Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' that would not make it any less a part of the body. But if the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, 'I have no need of you,' nor again, the head to the feet, 'I have no need of you.'" Paul concludes the section of this letter to the Corinthians, quote, "If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together," unquote. In this letter, Paul is urging the church in Corinth to function as a community. Obviously, there's been discord, divisions, and a total lack of harmony. He wants to remind its members that each one brings different gifts to the community. And for the community to be healthy, it has to let its members exercise those gifts with some degree of freedom of expression. Human beings started out as tribal creatures, and within the tribe, only a small amount of variation was tolerated. Someone who was truly different was either cast as a shaman, man or woman, or expelled from the tribe. As we have moved beyond tribal allegiances to a national allegiance, we have broadened our general identity, but not necessarily our tolerance for differences. Actually, right now in the US, our national identity is not very unifying over our differences in race, politics, economic status, or religion. And the biggest divide might be between those who can tolerate differences and those who cannot. Personally, one of the things that drew Bill and me to this UU congregation is the UU tolerance and really welcome of differences in its congregations. We couldn't bear to join a congregation that said officially or often unofficially, you have to believe this doctrine or creed, be straight, white, and middle class. However, as I suggested in my opening statement, I think creating community is very challenging, really difficult, especially in our culture that prizes individuality so much. There are many other cultures, especially Asian ones, where the culture supports communal thinking and actions. For example, in Korean, one doesn't use the word my the way we regularly do. They always say our school, our sister, and even our husband. It shapes the way you look at other people, as if everyone becomes our aunties and our uncles. South Africa has a term that expresses the philosophy of community. It's called Ubuntu. Archbishop Desmond Tutu summarized Ubuntu as, quote, I am because we are, unquote. One has no identity outside of a community. That really is opposite to mainstream American thinking. Another South African thinker described the concept this way, quote, Ubuntu is the substance and core being of a person and speaks particularly about the fact that we cannot be fully formed as human beings in isolation. It is only through our communal participation and interaction with other people that we begin to develop trust, compassion, caring, humility, kindness, and forgiveness, which are all qualities of what it means to be human and humane toward others. Sociology and psychology define this process as the socialization of an individual. The family teaches a child what roles that it is expected to fill, its duties, how it should solve arguments, deal with frustrations, and deal with the larger society outside of the family. However, school also functions to socialize us, as do our friends, church, and all other communities we come in contact with. But forming and maintaining community is not easy. In its simplest form, look at how hard marriage is to sustain, especially now when it's relatively easy and socially acceptable to get a divorce. However, I've seen a larger community suffer greatly from the divorce of just one marriage in its midst. One of the communities that has been most important in my life went through the divorce of a couple who, as individuals, were equally important to the group. Because the divorce was particularly bitter, the partners forced the members to take sides. Eventually, for the health of the community, one of the two partners had to be excluded in order to maintain the community. This was extremely painful for everyone. Many churches struggle when an important couple in its life together divorce. Most communities are formed because people have some things in common: values, geography, family relationships, economic needs, etc. And some communities require more allegiance and commitment than others. However, if we are really called to create community, and I believe we are, then to form community across some of those major divides in our society is especially challenging work. As someone who has now served on the board of the Elder Spirit community for 6 years, I can vouch for how difficult the task is and the extent to which We regularly fail. All it takes is one or two members to sabotage a process. Our members' organization runs by consensus, which is a good method for ensuring that all members of a community are in agreement with a major decision. The way it works at Elder Spirit is that we have a set of colored cards that can be held up in our meetings for approval, disapproval, or blocking a decision. The green card signifies approval and is always produced when we are voting on minutes or financial reports, because these are sent out in advance of meetings, and if anyone feels a correction needs to be made, it can happen before the meeting. A yellow card means that I don't agree with a decision that's being made because I feel that there are major unanswered questions. If I produce a yellow card in a vote, I'm required to state what the unanswered question is. If the question can be answered in a satisfactory manner, I am expected to drop the yellow card and hold up a green card. There's a white card that can be held up during a discussion of an issue which says, I agree with the point just made. It saves unnecessary verbiage and time during a discussion. We also have a blue card which says, we need to take a break and regroup because unkind words are being used, interruptions are happening, and the discussion is out of control. The leader of the meeting should take note and act accordingly to stop the discussion for a few minutes. Finally, there is a red card. The red card blocks action, and the proposed action cannot go forward. Use of the red card has gone through many refinements just in the 7 years I've been at Elder Spirit. One of the early refinements got made after a member tried to block the sale or disposal of an old upright piano after a good digital one was purchased. It was decided that a red card could only block a proposal if the person showing it felt that the proposal violated one of the key values of the community and was prepared to say what value was being violated. The red card couldn't be used just because the member didn't like the action, as in the question about the piano. Then we had a case where a couple brand new members red carded a proposal, and we wrestled with two questions. Could an action be stopped with 1 or 2 red cards? Or did we require 3 or 4 red cards to stop an action? Similarly, how long must a member live at Elder Spirit and participate in member meetings before they were permitted to red card an action? Shouldn't there be a period of 3, 4, or 6 months for a new member to understand how we did things and become really familiar with the community before they could start red carding actions? You can see how complicated this whole process of concession decision-making can become, especially since with fair housing laws, we can't refuse anyone who wants to move here and qualifies by income. So we cross lots of usual boundaries in our community because it is mixed income, owners of units and renters who have to prove income eligibility, faith backgrounds, Catholics, Protestants, Jewish members, and those who consider themselves Buddhists. And we are located in the historic African-American section of Abington and have members of mixed racial heritage as members. We are probably closest to being uniform in the area of politics, but even there, we tread carefully and ban external signs so as not to give offense or violate our nonprofit status. So building community here at Elder Spirit is a constant battle and one we never completely win, even when most of us agree on something. Probably We show the best of our community functioning when we support each other through short-term mutual care. Each person is supposed to have 2 members who are designated as their neighborly care coordinators. In the event that a member of our community needs surgery or has an accident that causes temporary disability, these coordinators are supposed to line up the volunteers to provide the support depending on what is needed. If a person can't drive for a short time, then transportation to the doctor or help getting groceries is on the list. If the person breaks an arm, then help dressing or getting meals is needed. Sign-up sheets are put in our common house and folks sign up. If something else is needed, like pet care, we have a list of tasks and volunteers, and the coordinator can call specific people to see if they can help. However, not all have committed to the system, and some have declined to choose even one mutual support coordinator. One can't force all to participate. There are members who rarely participate in the member association meetings. There are members who don't serve on any committee. And we even had a member who violated basic conflict of interest rules and arranged a purchase for the members association in which she received a large commission. We quickly enacted a policy to prevent that in the future. And of course, she red carded the policy, but couldn't cite a value that it violated, so it passed. Community is hard work. So what do we need? What do we need to create community? Let's go back to some of those statements about Ubuntu. One of the things we are supposed to learn from our parents is trust. It takes trust in each other to create community. Of course, to trust, we have to be vulnerable, just as a baby is vulnerable. But when we trust, we are likely to get stepped on, put down in a meeting, or the community is vulnerable to being taken advantage of, as in the case of the person who ripped off Elder Spirit for a commission. Being vulnerable is not comfortable, but trust is essential for community. The second quality mentioned is compassion. We need to have some compassion for each other, meaning some empathy for each other's life situation and their feelings. Probably the clearest example of compassionate elder spirit is our mutual support system. We do tasks for each other, regardless of whether we are friends or not, or even like the person or not. And that compassion needs to extend to ourselves if we make a mistake in doing something within the community. And if we don't want to do a particular task for the community, we need to be grateful to someone who is willing to step up to the plate and accept the responsibility, even if they don't do the task quite as well as we think it ought to be done. I've been a member of organizations where I thought the president didn't run meetings very efficiently, and the meetings took much longer than necessary. But since I didn't want to be president of that organization, I always needed to remind myself that the current president is willing to do the work. So I should just be grateful that he or she is willing to do all the other tasks that go with being a president, and not resent the extra time I have to spend in meetings. Humility is another ingredient necessary for Ubuntu and community. It is implied in the example just given of tasks and strengths. If a person honestly assesses one's own skills and those of others, one will recognize which tasks he or she can perform for a community and which ones are beyond those abilities. This lends to some humility in recognizing another's gifts and some gratitude toward them when those gifts or abilities are contributed to the community. I'm reminded of a period several years back when several strong leaders left the board of Elder Spirit Development Corporation on completion of their elected terms. And several of us already had the roles that suited our gifts. We looked around to see who could become president. There was really only one person who had served long enough to be well oriented to the work, but over the last couple of years of meetings had been a mostly silent board member. We wondered if she would have the skills or even accept such a role, but we asked her. She took a week to think about the possible nomination. In the end, she agreed to accept the position if elected, and she turned out to be a very effective president during a very difficult year as we transitioned between two management companies. It humbled me because I had been way too quick to judge her without knowing her better. The definition of Ubuntu also included kindness. And you might think, isn't that the same as compassion? However, I think of compassion as empathy, as concern for another's welfare, not necessarily the same as how we talk to the person or treat them in a meeting or in a group. Also, kindness depends a little on one's perspective. I remember a book club discussion here in which a close friend strongly rebutted a comment I made. I was surprised, but not offended. A new member of the group immediately insisted that the friend had been unkind and disrespectful in her comment and should apologize. I hadn't perceived the comment that way because I've known the friend for 50 years and know deep in my being that she does respect me and wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. She was just disagreeing strongly with what I said. So it made me reflect later that how we interpret words and actions in a group or a relationship depends a lot on our history together, the trust mentioned earlier, as well as our understanding of the other person. I've observed that most of the unkind words or actions that have happened here at Elder Spirit often occur either from or toward new members. Of course, this isn't always the case. One can't have so open a community as ours without attracting one or two people who really aren't interested in being part of a community, who almost systematically alienate everyone else and make cooperative work difficult. Luckily, not many like their land here. The final characteristic necessary for community is forgiveness. Obviously, it's needed over and over because we constantly make mistakes. We say or do unkind things and misinterpret other people. And within any community, there are interpersonal conflicts and relationships that turn hostile. I recently read an article written by a Jewish man who grew up on a kibbutz in northern Israel and continued to spend his life on that kibbutz after being away for a university degree and the required military service. His father had been a survivor of the Holocaust. As you can imagine, kibbutz life is very intense community life. The sharing of property, work, childcare, and all social life. He talked about the centrality of forgiveness, saying, quote, The ability to live in an intimate society where you do not have a whole load of negative emotions toward others is essential, unquote. He continues to explain, quote, I used to be a mediator. People would assure me a conflict was over, but we had no way to stop the feelings of hurt and hatred. We have people in the kibbutz hating others because they were hurt years ago. You cannot run a community like this, unquote. I agree. But again, forgiveness is hard work, and we don't always complete it. The Elder Spirit member who got a big commission out of the purchase of an item for the community triggered at least 50 hostile emails over the course of a couple months between her and members of the finance committee. She was someone Bill and I used to drive to the opera videos at Tinseltown in Bristol on Saturday afternoons. I confess that it took almost a year for me to invite her to go to the opera again. There have been occasions when Elder Spirit members have made complaints to the police on each other or have sent police to another's doorstep. Those hurts do not heal easily, if ever. So if community is so hard to create and sustain, why do we bother? Why is it so important? For one thing, we really need it. Our need is most obvious as children and as elders. Maybe we can get along with a bit less community as active working adults. However, as the cliche goes, it takes a village to raise a child. And I can vouch that as an elder, especially in the time of COVID, community is really desired and necessary. Besides, I really think as spiritual beings that we are called to create community. We are called to take care of each other, to be our brother's keepers, to form a beloved community, as Martin Luther King Jr. called it. His idea of the beloved community was based on what Jesus called the kingdom of God, which never referred to life after death, but to the brotherhood, sisterhood of people under God. And most of Jesus's teachings were to define what it meant to be a brother, sister, or neighbor in that beloved community. Now that we live in a global economy with threats to our existence from nuclear weapons, climate change, and environmental degradation, it is even more important to create community. And community has to involve crossing those barriers that separate us from people who are different from us. We won't always succeed, and our communities will never be perfectly formed or functioning. Just look at the United Nations or Elder Spirit. But the struggle in that direction is worth it.